In the TV special, A Charlie Brown Christmas, Charlie Brown is the director of the play. He tries to get the other kids to pay attention. He shouts, all right now, no time for foolishness. We've got to get on with our play. Lucy echoes, that's right. Then she asks Charlie Brown, what about my part? What about the Christmas Queen? She smiles and flashes her eyes at Charlie Brown. Lucy says, are you going to let all this beauty go to waste? Charlie Brown rolls his eyes. Then she asks, you do think I'm beautiful, don't you, Charlie Brown? He is silent. Lucy wags her finger at Charlie Brown and says, you didn't answer me right away. You had to think about it first, didn't you? If you really had thought I was beautiful, you would have spoken up. I know when I've been insulted. She stomps away and yells again, I know when I've been insulted. Charlie Brown says, good grief. Relationships are not easy. At this time of year, with the heightened stress, increased activities, more demands, and sometimes unrealistic expectations, relationships can be a challenge. Conflict is inevitable. A husband gave his wife a beautiful skunk fur coat for Christmas. When his wife opened the box, she said, I cannot see how such a nice coat can come from such a foul-smelling little beast. The husband said, you don't have to thank me, but I'd rather you didn't insult me. Anthony Jeselnik wrote to Reader's Digest, this past Christmas, I told my girlfriend that all I wanted was an Xbox. That's it, beginning and end of list, Xbox. You know what she got me? A homemade frame with a picture of us from our first date together, which was fine because I got her an Xbox. Nan Roberts wrote in the New York Times, ever since Eve gave Adam the apple, there's been a misunderstanding between the sexes about gifts. There are plenty of other sources of conflict among people at this time of year. A mother reported that her 4-year-old daughter said to her 2-year-old sister, let's play Christmas. I'll be Santa Claus, you be the present, and I'll give you away. One father said, I tell my kids that Santa is fat because he eats the children who get up early on Christmas morning. That way I can sleep in. Our Charlie Brown Christmas contains lots of conflicts among the kids and even between Lucy and Snoopy. Lucy is shouting at the cast, listen, all of you, you've got to take direction. You've got to have discipline. You've got to have respect for your director. Snoopy has been mocking her behind her back the whole time she's been yelling. She notices Snoopy making fun of her, raises her fist and says, I ought to slug you. Beyond making fun of each other and the threat of violence, the kids are mean to one another in other ways. Charlie Brown says, thanks for the Christmas card, Violet. Violet responds, I didn't send you a Christmas card, Charlie Brown. He counters, don't you know sarcasm when you hear it? During Advent and Christmas, we sing about the peace of Christ, but relationships can be strained. When people are not getting along, the holidays can make it worse. How can we live at peace with our family, friends, co-workers, and beyond? Professor Michael Dews, in his lectures on the art of conflict management, says, conflict occurs in all human relationships. Handled badly, it harms individuals, relationships, organizations, communities, and nations. Handled well, it helps identify and solve problems and build stronger, deeper relationships. Conflict is bound to occur, especially at this time of year. How can we handle conflict well so that we can build stronger, deeper relationships rather than causing harm to one another? As Christians, we are to live in harmony with others as best we can. St. Paul encourages the Christians in Rome, if possible, to the best of your ability, live at peace with all people. That's a good goal for all of us, especially during the Advent and Christmas season when we celebrate the coming of the Prince of Peace and look forward to his return. Paul offers several good suggestions in our passage from Romans on how to have peace with others. All his suggestions for how to interact with others grow out of the love we're to have for one another. He calls on Christians to love each other without pretense, have genuine love for each other. In the next line, he says, love each other like members of a family. In another translation, love one another with mutual affection. Admittedly, peace is not always possible. It takes two people to have a peaceful relationship. But loving others as a sister or brother with genuine love is our calling as Christians. That love will take us a long way toward living in harmony with one another. One of the biggest challenges to peaceful relationships is when someone offends us. They hurt us, and so we want to hurt them. Yet, the apostle teaches us, bless people who harass you. Bless and don't curse them. And don't pay back anyone for their evil actions with evil actions. Our tendency is to pay people back in some way. Andre Dawson played for the Chicago Cubs as an outfielder. He had to pay $1,000 for disputing a strike call by umpire Joe West. On the memo line of his check, Dawson wrote, "Donation for the blind." That probably felt good, but did nothing for his relationship with the umpire Joe West. Phil Threlkill, in his book, Loving Like God Loves, tells a story about another Hall of Fame baseball player, Wade Boggs. Boggs handled a conflict in a different way. He was playing for the Boston Red Sox, and he hated playing at Yankee Stadium. Not because of the Yankees, they never gave him that much trouble, but because of a fan. That's right, one fan. The guy had a box seat close to the field. When the Red Sox were in town, he would torment Boggs by shouting obscenities and insults. It's hard to imagine one fan getting under a player's skin, but this guy had just the right recipe. One day, as Boggs was warming up, the fan began his routine, yelling, "Boggs, you stink," and variations on that theme. Boggs had enough. He walked directly over to the man who was sitting in the box seat near the field, and he said, "Hey, fella, are you the guy who keeps yelling at me?" The man said, "Yeah, that's me. What are you going to do about it?" Boggs took a new baseball out of his pocket, autographed it, and tossed it to the man. Then he went back to the field for his pregame warm-up. The man never yelled at Boggs again. In fact, he became one of Boggs' biggest fans at Yankee Stadium. Jesus tells us to love our enemies. It might change them, and even if it doesn't, it will change us. Boggs also was following another part of St. Paul's advice: be the best at showing honor to each other. He honored that hateful fan as if he were one of the best fans Boggs had. It worked to end the conflict and transformed the antagonist into a supporter. That goes along with another principle in this paragraph. Consider everyone as equal, and don't think that you're better than anyone else. Instead, associate with people who have no status. Don't think you're so smart. If we are humble, it will help us avoid conflicts and help put an end to conflicts when they occur. In the Revised English Bible, verse 10 says, "Esteem others more highly than yourself. When you love others as a sister or brother, you put them ahead of yourself." Don't assume you are more intelligent or more spiritual than others. Many times we are offended by others because we assume that they are inferior to us in one way or another. We look down on them. We don't think their ideas are as good as ours. If we're going to have peace, we need to treat others equally and not put them down. If we put others ahead of ourselves, harmony is likely to follow. The story is told of a judge who had been frequently ridiculed by a conceited lawyer. A friend asked him, Why don't you rebuke your assailant?" The judge replied, "In our town lives a widow who has a dog, and whenever the moon shines, it goes outside and the dog barks all night." Having said that, the magistrate shifted the conversation to another subject. Finally, his friend asked, "But Judge, what about the dog and the moon?" "Oh," he replied, "the moon went on shining, that's all." Keith Wagner, in his book titled "Who Said Loving Others Was Easy," tells a story about the Berlin Wall. It had just been erected. Hostilities flared when truckloads of stinking garbage were dumped from East Berlin over the wall into West Berlin. Many residents wrote to the mayor demanding revenge for this offense, but he responded in a unique way. He asked the people to gather all the flowers in West Berlin and bring them to a certain place at the wall. They poured a great avalanche of beautiful and fragrant flowers over the wall. Part of loving others is to identify with them where they are. Paul wrote, "Be happy with those who are happy, and cry with those who are crying." Or in another translation, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep." When Charlie Brown comes to the stage as the director of the play, the other kids clap, even though some think he is a blockhead. But Snoopy is booing. After the applause ends, Snoopy is still booing. Charlie Brown shakes his head and says, "Man's best friend." In order to rejoice with those who rejoice and to weep with those who weep, we have to put ourselves in another person's shoes. We have to empathize with them. In the grief that I've experienced, I've been blessed by those who came alongside me and felt the pain that I was feeling and wept with me. Such empathy is a gift. If we love without pretense, if we love each other as sisters and brothers, as Paul says, then it will be easier for us to relate to the emotions of others, to identify with them, and to live at peace with them. Paul and Barnabas were close friends, but they had a falling out over John Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. John Mark, also called Mark, had accompanied Paul and Barnabas on their first missionary journey. But along the way, things became too difficult, and Mark turned back and went home. Paul was hurt and angry that Mark had abandoned them. When Paul and Barnabas were ready to go on their second missionary journey, Barnabas wanted to take Mark again. Paul was adamant that Mark could not come because he had deserted them before. The disagreement became so sharp that Paul and Barnabas parted company. Paul took Silas with him, and Barnabas took Mark with him, and they went in separate directions. Here were two spiritual giants, Paul and Barnabas, who could not get along. Conflicts happen even among the most dedicated Christians. The good news is that reconciliation is possible. Later in several of Paul's letters, he mentions Mark with affection. Mark was with him when Paul wrote to the Colossians. Paul was going to send Mark to Colossae, and so he tells them to welcome Mark. On another occasion, Paul told Timothy to contact Mark and bring Mark with him when he came to visit Paul. Paul said, "Mark is a great help to me." Paul refers to Mark as the cousin of Barnabas. In another letter, Paul calls Mark his fellow worker. Clearly, Paul and Mark had been reconciled. They had made peace with each other. There's a song in our hymnal that many of us like, "Let There Be Peace on Earth." It was written by Jill Jackson Miller and Cy Miller for the International Children's Choir in 1955. Jill had been suicidal after the failure of her marriage to screenwriter Felix Jackson. She later said that she wrote the song after discovering what she called the life-saving joy of God's peace and unconditional love. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. That's our challenge and our calling in all of our relationships, to be so filled with the life-saving joy of God's peace and unconditional love that we make peace and live in harmony with others. Amen.